And I would like to Marianne for inviting me to present my parts of my research, and also the opportunity to hear very fascinating presentation that we had earlier, and of course after me. Today I will share with you part of my ongoing doctoral research in Brazil, in which I've been looking at the increasing diversification of end-of-life care and the transformations in managing death and dying on the practice of palliative care and also the training of death doulas. Before starting the discussions about the learning practices in the youth training, I want to begin with a brief context about the death doula movement in Brazil. Well, we are currently seeing the expansions of the work of youths in countries of the global south. As happening in other countries, this movement seems to be associated with the dissemination of palliative care, which has gained preeminence in Latin America recently due to public policies and its integration into national health systems. In Brazil, this is very recently. This year, we had approval the public policy to include in the public health system palliative care. So just to look how is different our realities. In Brazil, there are at least 3 training programs for youths offered by different institutions. For legal reasons, only the AmorTser Institute used the terms Death Doulas or end-of-life doulas to name their training course and describe their role and practice. Despite similarities in training programs, other organizations use the terms like end-of-life guardians and midwives of passage to describe their role. In May 2023, a group of Brazilian youths, many of whom were trained by AmorTser, initiated a movement to establish a DOM, the Brazilian Death Doulas Association. The proposal is for a DOM to function as a community of practice, setting standards for the profession, promote the practice, establish a remuneration framework, advance death education, and represented the category in efforts to regulate the profession of death doulas. The association does not have legal status yet, is in the process, so we come for it. Finally, efforts to socially recognize doulas include the participation of professionals in podcasts on palliative care, death, and dying and grief, as well as the development of academic research on these topics. There are at least 3 doctoral theses in progress, one of mine. And the first review articles on death doulas in Brazil have also been published, as well as information guides on the practice of youths, both the result of studies supervised by Professor Glenda Agra. And it's very interesting because of these professors read a lot of the papers that are published in the Global North, of course. In this presentation, I want to draw attention to how the expertise of death doula is constructed in the context of a training program. What skills and competencies are expected of a death doula? How are the values, knowledge, and skill associated with the role and the practice learned? I did 10 months of ethnographic fieldwork between March and November 2021 and March 2022, accompanying the Death Doula training program offered by the AmorTser Institute, online and in person in the south of Brazil. Given the emphasis on experiential activities in the training, I was a researcher learner in that context. I participated in all the lessons, completed the task, and involved my body in the learning process. Drawing on this ethnographic data, I will show in this presentation how the engagement of the body in the learning process is a fundamental condition to develop technical and behavioral competencies, educate the sense and the sensitivity and becoming I old, or in the terms of my interlocutors, being the death doula gaze. Anna and Tatiana, a physiotherapist and a nurse, both with experience in palliative care, oncological patients, and aging, were the founders of the AmorTser Institute. As they remarked, the organization was the first in Brazil and in Latin America to offer a death doula training program. The idea of creating the course came about when they began to share the experience, challenges, and lessons they face when accompanying people at the end of their lives in their work. To design the training program, they identify and systematize the skill they use to accompany patients through the dying process, including the relation with the family and healthcare professionals. To formulate the program, they analyze the content and training programs for end-of-life doulas offered in other countries, adapting the curriculum to Brazilian culture. The Brazilian Association of Thanatopraxis and Thanatology validates the death doula training. The first edition of the training took place in 2019. Currently, there are around 150 death doulas trained by the AmorTser Institute. And I accompanied the fourth group of the course. In that moment, we were living the COVID-19 pandemic. So for this reason, class that used to be in person took place most online. This group that I accompanied was mostly composed of women in their 40s and 60s, with only 2 men. In general, the majority of the group were health professionals, doctors, nursing technicians, and psychologists, but there were also birth doulas, caregivers, educators, holistic therapists, journalists, managers, and artists. And this data about the profiles of people who take part in the death doula training confirm what has already been noted in international research on death doula role and their practice, like Marion and Marilyn Rush paper, that mention how many of those who become death doulas have a background in healthcare, social care, or education, and may already have some experience with death and dying. According to the principles guiding AmorTser's proposal, the role of a death doula is not restricted to assisting in the physical process of dying, but support the endings, material and symbolic. As one of the course organizers remarked, the way the training was designed requires involvement in the learning processes. In her words, that's the trick of the course. To become a death doula, you have to die first. In this sense, the process of learning and the becoming a doula as proposed in the AmorTser Institute training invite use, first of all, to support and dealing with our death through self-evaluation, experimentation, and feeling. The lesson seeks to place the doula in training in a position of self-reflexivity, allowing her to be sensitized, and at the same time developing her sensory and perceptive capacity to act in death and dying scenarios. In this sense, the training context is oriented towards the development of technical and behavioral competencies. Technical competencies, as defined by the facilitators, are related to concepts and skills enabling people to do. Behavioral competencies involve postures and attitudes and is relating to being. During the course, we often hear phrases like, dying is not something USA, the death scene is chaotic, and dying is not pretty. However, at the same time, as these reminders, the purpose of the course was to bring us closer to certain experience, sensations, and emotions experienced in dying situations so that we could develop and integrate the skills needed to support people at the end of their life. As one of the training facilitators says, when referring to the centrality of experience in the course, When the body lives the experience, no one can take that learning away from you. In general, the lessons in the Death Doula training course were divided in two moments. An expository moment where concepts and techniques were presented, and an experimental moment where the tools presented were practiced in individual activities. Between each part, usually after the dynamics, a space was opened for those who wished to share with the group what they had felt during the activity. These moments of sharing were often very diverse. They dealt with physical sensations, emotions, memory of traumatic events, experiences that articulate the themes covered with situations of death, different memories and feelings. Being aware of body sensations and recognizing the reflection of emotions in the body based on the experiential practices permeates all the training and is a fundamental tool for becoming a death doula as proposed by the AmorTser training course. In this way, the sensitization to particular and subtle models of attention is constantly working on in the course, and the skill of different kinds, practical, attentive, sensory, are exercised and integrated, shaping the expertise of the death doula. In individual dynamics, we were invited to choose the music for our funeral, to imagine and write our obituary, to observe and reflect what it feels like to wear a diaper for a few hours. In the group dynamics, like meditations, mindfulness, and active listening exercise and death anchoring practices, the aim is to integrate skills through experimentation and guided perceptual engagement. For example, in one of the dynamics, we had to be blindfolded, and this was intended to remove the primacy of the eyes and enable use to sharpen our listening skills. In this exercise, we were in pairs, and each person chose a song that like. Afterwards, one person in the pair remained in the room and was blindfolded, while the other left the room. When the pair that was outside returned to the room, they had to sing the song that had been indicated by their partner while moving around the space. The person who was blindfolded tried to follow their partner by the sound of the song. After the listening dynamic, some people expressed feelings of helplessness, of abandonment, feeling lost, uncomfortable with the noise. Since there were several pairs doing the activities together and there were several cross voice. But there were also those who say they felt familiarized and embraced by following the voice. Another dynamic involved finding a partner without using words, just by looking. The aim of the activity was to practice non-verbal forms of communication, also to provide contact with, also another kinds of activities intend to provide contact with the different scenarios in which doulas can develop professionally. We visited a cemetery and the thanatopraxy room of a funeral home, and the proposal to understand how we feel when we are in this space, and whether, for example, when working with a family that need help with issues related to funeral rituals, we will be able to recognize our limits and decide if we could perform the role. Thus, one of the last practices experienced in the training was the living funeral. Marked by strong emotions, this exercise proposed experiencing death through a meditation guide by Isabel, one of the facilitators' course. Isabel's words led us to revisit various stages of our lives. She described episodes that tried to recover memories of significant and trivial situations, memories of different stages of life experience marked by affections, a moment of sharing with relevant people. The effects of the images created by these evocations were felt in the corporeality of those who were gradually experienced death, as evidenced by the expression of a smile, a peaceful face, or the release of a few tears. While one person was experiencing symbolic death, the other person remained by their side, supporting them in this moment in the position of a death doula. After a few moments of silence, Isabel said, "Imagine that in this process, you feel a companion by your side. You open your eyes and meet a loving gaze, and you are embraced. Imagine that you are being supported by a death doula." As the living funeral dynamic suggests, the doula is sensitized by recourse to her own death through the ambiguous relationship established in the training process between developing specific skills and experience of a profound process of self-knowledge and self-awareness, based on autonomy, reflection, and the construction of learning pathways that allow each death doula to build her own process. The training facilitators propose teaching techniques through experience and perceptive and sensitive engagement in the simulation of learning about death and dying. The aim is to integrate knowledge through experience so that the skills and competencies needed to assist the dying are incorporated into the personality and conduct of the death doula, bringing out what is called, in the context of the training program, the death doula gaze. In the context of my research, the doula gaze is a key category. According to the death doulas who provided training, the doula gaze is a disposition, always singular, because it refers to the subject who is looking and their subjectivity in this relationship with others. In other words, it refers both to a skill that is exercised and to something that one is. The idea of gaze is not limited to vision, as different concepts, sense, and perceptions are involved in doula practice as an embodied technique. The notion of presence is fundamental in this context and indicates a posture, a disposition, which is characterized by full attention, active listening, and an accurate ability to perceive both the person at the end of life and the environment and other subjects that make up the setting in which the death doula is working. In the words of one of the training organizers, the doula gaze is about arriving and not knowing what to do. It's being in the present, being empty, and moving unpredictable. We are going to deal with improvisation. That's why we insist on vulnerability. From this perspective, improvise is perceived as a resource and as a state of openness to the imponderable, to vulnerability and affectation, and above all, as a condition for the death doula works to be developed. During the lessons, the distinction between the attributes of a death doula and health professionals was addressed at different times, especially when mentioning the singularity of the doula's practice. Unlike health professionals, who must follow protocols and act according to the procedures, the sense of the doula remains fluid and non-protocol based. I take as remarked by a training facilitator, so it's not about complying with a protocol. It means being attentive and vulnerable in order to be able to feel, to intuit, and realize what makes sense to the person who is dying. We don't want to repeat what happens in the training of health professionals who, guided by rationality, memorize formulas and guidelines and apply them in a verticalized way. The doula in this conception must be open and vulnerable, learn from each experience of accompanying people at the end of life, and create her own way of being a death doula. In this sense, associated with the idea of presence and complementary to it, the training facilitators present the notions of entirety. No, sorry. The idea of entirety is associated with what I mentioned above about the development of attitudinal competencies. So it's involved the process of the doula recognizing her personal aptitudes, being aware of her qualities and limitations, and based on this, empowering inner skills. In an exercise, and to practice in entirety, we had to write in a paper our best qualities and abilities. After writing them, without even sharing the list, the facilitator chose to destroy it. This exercise was designed to make us aware of the qualities we had recognized in ourselves. Yes. Well, to conclude, the words of a training colleague seem to summarize the issue I have tried to develop here. To be a death doula, you need to have experience in the flesh, and you also need to have a lot of sensibility. In the context of AmorTser training, becoming a death doula implies the appropriation of a singular corporeality based on somatic modes of attention, summarized by categories such as presence, entirety, and vulnerability, which I think describe, in this particular context, the perceptive engagement in relation to bodily sensations and the environment that generate these feelings, seen as fundamental tool in support people and their lives at the end of life. As I have observed in my research, sensitivity is a skill, but is not automatically reproduced. In other words, even though it's learned, exercised, and incorporated through specific learning techniques, it's necessary to create connecting elements that allow this sensitivity to be applied correctly. After all, each person is unique, and each process of dying and death is particular. And it is in this sense that I suggest that death doulas are trained according not just in a person-centered logic, but in a logic of support centered on the difference between people. And here I make a counterpoint with palliative care, my other leg, the other leg of my research, which is guided by a person-centered logic. Thank you very much for your attention.